Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming back. It's going to be a quicker one today because I've got to go and pick the girls up in about half an hour to 40 minutes. So I'm going to squeeze in a couple of chapters because it's starting to heat up a bit. Rilke took the others and Schiller to meet the Man in the Storm, thinking that he'd heal Schiller. The Man in the Storm's like, I'm gonna kill you, basically, and started attacking her. She called out to the only person she knew who could probably help her, which was Daisy. Daisy kind of teleported. She's an angel now, or whatever these things are. She's teleported over, and they basically had their first big confrontation with the Man in the Storm. And they came off all right. They were winning, and the Man in the Storm was like, oh no, and he kind of popped out and disappeared from where he was in London. So, Graham, this security services guy, has just kind of caught up with them. And, so we'll find out what happens now. Rilke, London, 12:57 p.m. There was no London anymore, just a hole, as if somebody had simply ripped the city out of a giant map. Buildings still clung to the edge of the pit. Rilke thought she could see the London Eye teetering over the brink in the distance, and the Shard too, although it was missing its top. But everything else was gone. All that was left was absence and ruin, an abyss ringed by a wasteland. She felt as if her mind was the same, a gaping chasm where her sanity should have been, and every other thought reduced to rubble. At least the storm had disappeared, though. Whatever Schiller had done, it had worked. Other than the ceaseless rain of dust and rubble that streamed into the pit, the sky was empty. Oh, please let him be okay, she thought. Please, God, let him come back to me. There was a flash of light to her side, making her flinch, but when she turned, it was just Daisy materialising. She held a limp figure in her arms, a heap of empty sack that couldn't be her brother. It couldn't be. Rilke scrabbled across the ground, skidding onto her knees next to Schiller. There was a gaping wound in his stomach, the wetness there as dark as ink, but flecked with streaks of blood. She hugged him to her, smoothing down his hair. There were only a few wisps left, his scalp bald and wrinkled. In fact, his whole face looked like an old man's, his eyes 2 puffy bags and his mouth loose. He didn't look real. He looked as though he was made of paper, a child's scribble for a face. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? Schiller, talk to me, please. Please, little brother? Beside her, Daisy took a breath and her fire whispered off, her wings fading and folding until she was just a little girl again. She teetered and Cal ran to her, catching her as she fell. Her nose was bleeding and the boy gently smeared the blood away. She, too, could have been 100 years old. Adam ran to her, taking hold of her hand as if it was a butterfly. Rilke hated her. She hated all of them, and she hated herself most of all. How could she have been so stupid? What did you do to him? She said, clutching her brother to her chest. The emotion was pounding at her ribs with iron fists, screaming to be let out, but she locked it down, the pain in her throat like she'd swallowed glass. What did you do to him, Daisy? Leave it, Rilke, said Cal. You saw what happened. He saved us. They all did. Rilke stroked her brother's face, hard enough to leave welts on his pale skin. She shook him, calling his name, but he just stared into the middle distance. With glass eyes. Where are you, Schill? She asked him. Come out of there. Right now. Is it dead? Came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Brick emerging from the shell of a building, snorting dust from his nose. Did you kill it? No, said Daisy. There was some colour returning to her cheeks, pushing out the wrinkles. She sat up, leaning her head on Cal's chest, taking deep, rattling breaths. There was another flash of light, and suddenly the other boy was with them, his arms wheeling as he fought to catch his balance. He failed, plopping down onto his knees, looking around in shock. Daisy smiled at him, saying, Howie, are you okay? Not really, he said after a moment, shuffling onto his backside. I think I may have drunk too much rum. Rilke grabbed a handful of her brother's shirt, clutching it so hard that she thought her fingers would break. How dare he make jokes when her brother lay dying? So what then? Brick went on. I think the storm just moved, Daisy said. The little girl wiped the back of her hand across her face, smudging trickles of blood into a gory eye mask. The same way we do. It transported. Where? Asked Brick. California, shouted the man, the one who'd shown up on a motorbike, still standing further down the street. He told them his name, but Rilke didn't care. He was one of them, one of the humans, and Schiller should have killed him like he killed the woman. But that's wrong, Rilke, part of her brain argued. You were wrong, remember? About everything. She shook the thoughts away, watching as he clipped his phone shut. He was covered in dust, looking like a phantom in the weird orange light of the broken day. It's just appeared in the States. It's been confirmed. Cal? Who's he? Asked Daisy. He's a friend, I think, Cal replied. Everyone, this is Graham. Graham? Everyone. The man nodded a greeting, his brow furrowed. You mind telling me what the hell is going on? He said. Who are you? Just kids, said Daisy, but something else too. Shut up, shouted Rilke, her anger so much like a living thing inside her that she wondered if it was her angel. The two had to be linked. There was only one letter between them, after all. All of you, just shut up. My brother needs help. Schiller seemed to be sinking into himself, deflating. Rilke pulled him to her, the sobs finally breaking out of the prison of her throat, pouring from her mouth like vomit. She couldn't stop them, couldn't breathe, forcing herself to suck in great big lungfuls of air between her strangled cries. She couldn't bear it, to be so weak. Help him, she said to nobody, to everybody. I don't know what to do. He's going to die. Yeah, and whose fault's that? Said Brick behind her, ducking down on his haunches and spitting a gob of black phlegm. You brought him here. Rilke wanted to kill him. She wiped away her tears, but they kept flowing, and she pushed her face into the wetness of Schiller's stomach so that nobody would see them. He smelled of copper and soot, an old, found thing. She wished she could pull herself inside him, lock herself there in his blood. That way she wouldn't let him die. I was so sure, she said. You were so wrong, Brick muttered. It's okay, Brick, said Daisy. Her voice was close, and when Rilke looked up she saw the girl there, her hand resting on Schiller's forehead. She didn't want her to touch him, but she couldn't find the strength to object. Schiller, can you hear me? It's Daisy. No response. He could have been a corpse already. Daisy cocked her head and Rilke realised she was still speaking to him, but with her mind. Schiller coughed, spraying blood over her. His blood. Her blood. The same thing. She looked at it in horror, as if she was the one bleeding out. She pulled him to her, resting his head on her knee. I mean it, Schiller, said Daisy. Don't be scared. They'll look after you. What are you talking about, Rilke said. I'm going to look after him. Me and no one else. Do you hear me? Daisy didn't take her eyes off Schiller. The boy coughed again and his milky eyes cleared. He looked at Daisy, then at Rilke. It's okay, Schill, said Rilke. You are going to be well again. You will do what I say, she told him in her head. He had always done as she'd said. Always. She couldn't think of a single time he'd ever disobeyed her, not in all their years together, because she always did what was best for him. It was her job to look after him, and he knew that. He trusted her. You will not die. I won't let you. And then it hit her, the impossible thought of being without him, because they'd never spent a day apart, not once. He was as much a part of her as her own heart, her own thoughts, incubated together, born together, lived together. They were one. Because I can't live without you, Schill. I won't, so just rest and get better, and we can go back to how things were. He smiled at her. She could almost see the life draining from him, more of that oil-black fluid pumping from his stomach, as if his blood had been poisoned. He opened his mouth to speak, but retched instead, a fountain of ink gushing over his cheek. His body was a huge, broken thing that he could no longer control, that she could no longer control. No! Schiller! Rilke screamed. She grabbed him under the chin, twisting his head up. I will not let you die. Do you hear me? You will not leave me. I'm not scared, he said in a liquid whisper. It doesn't hurt. But I need you, little brother, said Rilke. I love you. His reply wasn't a word, but a thought, one that he beamed out with such strength that Rilke felt it. It was golden and bright and full of the smell of lavender and old books, like in the library back home, the place they'd spent day after day reading to each other and playing hide and seek, and later in life, where she'd hidden from the bad things, where her brother had looked after her. So wonderful that it seemed to blow away the last scraps of darkness from the city. Suddenly it was summer again, warm and quiet and full of a laughter that was felt, if not heard. Why couldn't they be there now, in their mother's window seat, her legs resting on his, as they told tales of what they would do when they left home? Not this. Never this. Rilke pushed her head into Schiller's chest, worming her way in as if she could pull out his sickness. Schiller managed to lift a hand, placing it on the back of her neck. His skin so cold it was as though he was frozen again. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, and she knew it would be the last time she heard his voice. Schiller's body trembled, his hand slipping loose, slapping against the ground. He gasped in one last breath, but there was no fear in his eyes, no sadness either, just a flicker of relief, and then nothing at all. A trickle of flame burned up through his chest, rising, growing, until with a sudden rush his angel clawed its way free from his flesh, soaring upwards with its wings spread, howling as it faded into the light. It seemed to rip the rage from her belly as it went, because Rilke found herself on her feet, screaming after it. "This is your fault! You did this to him! You bastard! You bastard!" But it was gone. She turned to Daisy, then to Cal, then to Brick, wanting to murder them all, to beat them into their graves for their part in Schiller's death. But without him, she was just a half person, a half soul, and she could not keep her balance. She staggered, falling down beside her brother's body, clutching him to her as if she could reattach him, shivering as the warmth of her twin chased up after the angel into the clearing skies. "Oh, poor Schiller, I'd forgotten that bit. I've had this weird memory that he was all right. He was going to do okay. Oh, so sorry, Shell. I feel sad now. Cal, London, 1:12 p.m. It seemed like an eternity before anyone spoke. Cal stood and stared at Rilke as she sobbed against her dead brother. Other than her, the only noise was the hail-like patter of debris as the heavens cast back the earth. "I'm sorry," said Daisy. She was still kneeling on the floor next to Rilke and Schiller, her hand on the boy's chest. "I'm really, really sorry, Rilke." Rilke didn't reply, her eyes dark and small, staring at something nobody else could see. Daisy looked at Cal and he smiled as best he could remember, holding out his hands to her. She struggled up and flew into him, hugging him tight, her gentle sobs breaking against his chest. "What now?" asked Brick. He kicked at scraps of stone on the floor, his hands wedged in his pockets. "It's over, right? For us, I mean." "No," said Daisy, wiping her eyes. "We have to go after him. He isn't dead." Brick's eyes bulged and he shook his head. "No way. We did our part. We scared it away. Let someone else handle it." "There is no one else, Brick," she replied. "There's just us." "But who are you?" asked the motorbike guy, Graham. He still stood on the other side of the street, just past that invisible threshold of the Fury. He kept glancing nervously at the sky, his phone open in his hand. "I don't understand." "Join the club," said Brick. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you," added Daisy. The man snorted a laugh. "Wouldn't believe that I saw you on fire, with wings, flying up there, fighting the whatever that thing was. Try me. I'm more open-minded than I was this morning." "It doesn't matter what we are," said Daisy. "It's what we're here to do. We're here to stop it." "But what is it?" "Evil," said Marcus from where he'd crouched on the ground. "It's Lucifer, the devil." But evil was the wrong word, thought Cal. It was more like a black hole, mindless, mechanical, devouring matter and light until there was nothing left. He didn't say it, though, because it sounded so stupid. Graham shook his head. "So you're telling me that you're the good guys?" he asked. Cal thought of the police back at Hemingway, dozens of them blown into ash. He looked out over the city, the pit that had been sunk into the middle of it, 10, 15 miles wide and God only knew how deep, opened up in the battle between the angels and the storm. How many people had died as a result? 1 million? It hadn't been their fault, but Schiller and Daisy and the new boy hadn't exactly pulled their punches. "Yes," Daisy said, "we are." Graham seemed to chew on this for a moment, then he nodded. He put his phone to his ear, talking too quietly for Cal to listen. "Seriously," whined Brick. "It's gone. It's not our problem." Graham was shouting now, his cheeks red with anger. "This might be our only chance," the man said. "Are you willing to bet everything on that? General? General?" He snapped the phone closed, pacing back and forth. He looked up at the sky, shielding his eyes from the ever-brightening sun. "Okay, we've got a problem. We've got to get underground. There's a tube station nearby. It'll keep us safe until Hazmat get here." "Safe from what?" asked Daisy. "I don't think the storm is coming back. I think we scared it." "Not the storm," said Graham. A nuke. A what? Said Cal. A tactical nuclear strike on the city. The main target was the storm, but they're aiming at you guys too. They think you're part of this. But why? Said Daisy, pulling loose from Cal. Because of what happened on the coast. You took out a whole town up there. It's just gone. That wasn't us, said Daisy. She looked at Rilke, shaking her head. It was an accident. It wasn't our fault. Not my call, he said. It's already been launched. We've got minutes. Come on. He set off back the way he'd come, but nobody followed him. What did you do, Rilke? Cal asked. You killed a whole town. She didn't reply. She didn't even seem to hear him. Jesus. Leave her alone, Cal, said Daisy. It wasn't her fault. Not her fault, said Brick. She's a psycho, or have you already forgotten? Leave her here. Let the bitch get fried. I'm serious, said the man, looking back over his shoulder. You can have this conversation when we're underground, but if you don't start moving, then you're all going to die. No, said Rilke. We're not. She stood slowly, running a hand down her top to brush away the blood and dirt that caked it. There was something in her eyes, something that burned. She turned to the man, then to Daisy. Can you find it? She asked. The storm? Daisy scuffed her feet in the dirt. She was missing a shoe, Cal noticed. I don't know. I think so. Why? Because I'm going to kill it, she said. It's going to die for what it did to my brother. Listen, said Graham. If we don't leave now, we're not going to make it. He's right, said Brick, stumbling towards the man. We should go with him. And then what? Said Cal. Hide? And what are you going to do when he starts trying to rip your face off? Brick stopped, uncertain. He swore, picking up a chunk of rock and lobbing it at the shell of a house. We should go. We should do this, Cal said. You saw what you did. You scared it. Hurt it, I think. Anything that can be hurt can die, right? I think so, said Daisy. I think it ran because it knew we might kill it. Then let's kill it, said Rilke. She walked to Daisy. Take us to him. No way, said Brick. You're crazy. Something growled overhead, a distant peal of thunder. Cal's heart seemed to forget what to do for an instant as he thought the man in the storm had returned. Then he realised it was something else, a plane maybe, or a missile. It grew louder, searing a path through the sky. That's it, said Graham. Last chance. Rilke looked at Cal, her expression full of a savage fury. There was a question there, as clear as if she'd spoken it. Are you coming? What choice did he really have? If they didn't stand up to the storm, then sooner or later the whole world would look like this. He nodded. Rilke turned to Marcus, who smiled weakly. I'm in, he said. Yeah, and me, said Howie. We should finish this. They all turned to look at Brick, that rumble in the sky getting louder all the time. It wouldn't need to reach the ground, Cal knew. It would be detonated over their heads where it would do the most damage. How long did they have? A minute? 5? Brick must have been thinking the same thing because he spat out another curse. Fine, he said. Have it your way. You should go, Daisy said to the man, before it's too late. What about you, he replied. You need to get underground, somewhere safe. We'll be okay, she said. She closed her eyes, the flames spreading slowly out from her chest, her wings unfolding like those of a waking swan. Just tell them we're on their side, she said, cold fire crawling up her neck. Tell them we're trying to help. And thank you for the warning. The inferno engulfed her, and when she opened her eyes it was as if they were portholes on the side of a burning ship. The air shook with the strength of her, that same mind-numbing hum, but behind it the growl of a plane grew louder. You sure about this? Asked Brick. I mean, we could just... Daisy didn't let him finish. She just lifted her arms and pulled the world up over their heads. Cal's stomach lurched. He saw Marcus vanish, then Adam, then Howie, Rilke too, with one final heartbreaking glance at the body of her brother. The man, Graham, was pulled up alongside them. Even as they went, something ignited overhead, a pure light that seemed even brighter than Daisy, a noiseless explosion that turned the sky silver. Cal saw the damage the nuke did as it blew up, a chain reaction that ripped things apart at their core. Would an angel have been able to stand up to that? Would they have lived if they hadn't been warned? Then there was nothing but the rush and tumble of the ether, and the awful knowledge of what awaited them on the other side. Daisy. London, 1:26 p.m. This whole book must take place in one day. That's crazy. This time she kept her eyes open. It was like when her dad used to make her fly when she was a kid. He would hold her tight, his huge hands engulfing hers, then spin around in a tight circle, launching her up into the air. The first few times she'd screwed her eyes shut, too afraid to watch despite the thrill, but when she knew for sure he wasn't going to let her go, send her sailing off over the roof of their house, she would open them, see the world moving so fast it was just a blur. The only constant, her dad's grinning face as he turned with her. She was the moon to his gravity. She knew that however fast he went, she would never pull free. It wasn't her dad keeping her locked tight, though, now. It was her angel. And as she escaped from the world, shrugging off droplets of reality the way a dog shakes itself after a swim, she thought she almost saw it there. It was like the world was made of coloured sand, pulled apart by a hurricane. Even as she rose up and out of time, Cal and Brick and poor lost Rilke and everyone else rising beside her, the landscape was scrubbed clean. The white light she had seen, the one that burned in the sky, brighter than the sun, brighter even than the angels, was a bomb, she realised. She peered into the very heart of it with her new eyes, saw the atoms colliding, the power that burst from each one as the reaction spread. The explosion reached for them, but, thanks to the man and his warning, they had already slipped through the cracks, stepped into a place where nothing, not even a nuclear blast, could ever hurt them. Gradually the light faded, the ruined city disappeared, leaving them hanging in an empty, quiet place. Not for long, though. Soon enough she felt the fingers of reality digging into her ribs, into her tummy, the same way you feel gravity try to pull you back down. Life wanted them back. It didn't like it when they found a way loose. She focused, keeping her eyes open. Doing so seemed to slow the whole process down, giving her more time to think. There was nothing around her now but darkness, and yet it was a strange kind of darkness that was also light. She could see the others floating alongside her as if they were all sinking into an ocean. They all had their eyes closed, but even if they hadn't, she didn't think they'd have been able to see her. It's not the same for them, she thought. This is just a blink of the eye, a single beat of the heart. It was funny watching them like this, as though they were asleep, and Daisy almost felt like laughing. Until she felt it. A sudden loss. Jade, she thought, seeing the girl for an instant in a forest surrounded by soldiers. Then the crack of a gunshot, and nothing. "I'm sorry," she said, her angel once again numbing the sadness. The world around her was vibrating ever so slightly, just the smallest tickle in the air, in her skin. The tremor was growing stronger, though, more insistent. That's so weird. I wrote the chapter of Jade where Jade died. I wonder why it's not in here. Must have been cut. It was the universe, she realised. They were in danger of breaking it. The little wheels and cogs and spinning things of reality just weren't designed to hold them here. What would happen if she resisted for much longer? Maybe time and space would simply close up behind her, shutting them out forever, locking them tight inside this pocket of nothingness. The thought frightened her, and she started to relax her mind, ready to let life reel her back in. Only something stopped her. Another thought. She reached into her head, into her soul, to the thing that now lived there. It didn't react, didn't seem to notice her, which wasn't surprising. These angels, they weren't really angels at all, not the angels she'd been brought up to believe in. They were more like animals or something. Or, no, more like machines. They didn't know how to communicate, she thought. Maybe they didn't know that communication was even a possibility. They were utterly single-minded, built for one purpose, to fight the man in the storm whenever and wherever he appeared. Everything else was alien to them, unknowable. They were programmed to defend life, and yet they didn't even know the magic, the wonder of what they were fighting for. If that was true, she thought, it was awful. The vibrations around her were growing worse, making her teeth chatter, even though she was pretty sure that here, in this place, she didn't have teeth. The others were jiggling around where they hung in midair, looking like sheets left out to dry in a strong wind, their faces growing distorted and strange. Daisy relaxed her grip on the ether, letting herself slide back towards the world, only anchoring herself again when she felt something move inside her chest. The angel. Was it trying to tell her something? Or was it just shifting around in there the way that she would often shuffle when she was in a car on a long journey, trying to get comfy? "Tell me," she asked it. "You can talk to me. I'm your friend. Tell me who you are. Please." Another itch inside her soul, a sensation that was painless but also unpleasant, as though she had feathers growing in the marrow of her bones. Was that how they spoke? Daisy felt like one of the ants that her dad had vacuumed up. For all she knew, those tiny little creatures may have been calling out, trying to talk to them. But how can an ant communicate with a human, and how could a human possibly communicate with an angel? It was impossible. And yet there was suddenly a thought inside her head, a sensation. This was uncomfortable too, scratchy feathers bristling in the flesh of her brain, but she seemed to understand its translation. This place, this awful, empty, shaking, freezing, groaning place, lost behind time, was home. This is where they lived, the angels, until they were called to fight, and this is where they returned once the war was over. There was no life, not here, no happiness or fun or family or friendship, just flashes of duty drowned in eons of nothingness. "Is that right?" she said, feeling like her insides had been scooped out and thrown away. The thought was too terrible. It was unbearable, but the angel said no more, not in a way she could understand. "You poor thing," she thought. "You poor lonely thing. I wish there was something I could do. I wish I could help you. You could stay with me forever if you want. I promise I'd never send you back here." And as soon as she thought the words, she wished she could take them back, because she didn't really mean it. After this, if there was an after, if she survived and there was a world left to live in, if she wanted to go back to her life, to maybe not to her house, because that would be too sad, but there were others she could live with, her gran maybe, or her mum's sister Jane. At least she could try to be normal again, and after time, who knew? Maybe all this would seem like a distant memory, a dream even. She could go back to school and university and get married and have babies and just be normal, just be Daisy. But none of that would be possible if she had an angel inside her, if at any moment she could burst into flames and burn the planet to ash. She pushed the thoughts away, hoping that the angel hadn't heard her offer, or at least hadn't understood it. Pulling the hooks of her mind from the world, she let herself fall, feeling her ears pop as the pressure changed. The others fell with her, those little blue flames burning in their chests, all except for Brick, that was. His flame had grown, spreading out across his shoulders and down towards his tummy. "He's next," Daisy thought, as their descent increased, the roar of the wind in her ears, the thunder of the fall making her bones rattle. She closed her eyes against the rush, doing her best not to scream. It was terrifying, and yet she felt something else too, something different. Excitement. It was such an odd feeling, next to the fear, that it took her a moment to understand that the sensation wasn't hers. It belonged to the angel, the thrill of escape, of leaving this place, of being born once again into the world. Whatever it was inside her, alien or angel or some piece of timeless cosmic machinery designed to keep the world in balance, it was eager. It was keen. It wanted to be away from here. As the tumble ended, the world reforming itself around her, Daisy wished once again that she hadn't said what she'd said. Because what if, when all was said and done, the angel didn't want to leave? I think we've got time for maybe one or two more. Brick, San Francisco, 1:26 p.m. Almost as soon as the smoking, gaping wreck of London had vanished, another landscape appeared, wrapping itself around Brick with enough force to send him reeling. He staggered back, tripping on his own feet, sunlight like a fist pounding at his face. His stomach lurched, puke pooling in his mouth as he fell. He thumped onto his backside, spitting, groaning through his wet lips and trying to see past the moisture in his eyes. They were in a forest, a pine forest, which at first looked so similar to the one back in Hemingway that he had a sudden rush of nostalgia, almost heartbreaking. It didn't take him long to notice that the trees here were bigger, though, swaying wildly from the shockwave Daisy had created as they arrived. Branches snapped free, crashing to the ground, 20, 30 seconds passing before everything was still. A breeze drifted through the quiet shade, carrying the smell of conifers. Through the trees he saw the sun was lower, like it was morning, and he wondered how far Daisy had brought them. The other guys were scattered over the forest floor, all of them except Daisy and the new boy Howie, wiping vomit from their lips. Brick stood up, ignoring the way the world seemed to spin. He didn't understand a single thing about what was going on, but he was pretty sure that getting repeatedly ripped apart into atoms and then reconstituted wasn't good for you. The truth was, he didn't actually feel that great. There was something wrong with his stomach. He put a hand to it, feeling almost as if a piece of him was missing, had been left behind in London. It wasn't painful, just weird. The thought of it, of being damaged, made him angry, or at least it should have done, but he felt strangely calm about the whole thing. "Where are we?" asked Cal, staggering to his feet. Daisy, just a girl again, shrugged her shoulders, taking in the forest with a look of confusion. Adam ran to her, and she took him in her arms. I don't know. I thought it would take us to where he was." Brick looked up through the trees, expecting to see the skies grow dark, but there was just sunshine and birdsong. "Maybe you did kill it," he said. "Maybe it's over." "No," said Daisy, "we didn't. The angels would have gone if the man in the storm was dead." Why did she look so nervous when she said that? "Maybe they have gone," said Brick. "How do you know they haven't pissed off back to wherever they came from?" Daisy closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were two pools of molten ore, so bright that Brick had to lift an arm to shield himself from their glare. "Oh," was all he could think of to say. "I'll take a look," said Daisy. She eased herself free of Adam, and Brick heard the whoomph of fire as she turned, followed by the slow, powerful beat of her wings. He peeked over the filthy, freckled skin of his arm to see her burning up through the branches. It was like watching the sun rise, and within seconds she hung against the blue, the brightest thing in the sky. Brick looked at Cal, then Marcus and Howie, and finally Rilke, who knelt on the ground, curled into herself, her eyes two dark pebbles that didn't blink. He wondered if he should say something to her, then decided not to. As evil as Rilke was, he kind of felt sorry for her. It couldn't be easy knowing that you'd led to your own brother to his death. Then again, she had shot Lisa in cold blood, murdered his girlfriend right in front of him. He rubbed his stomach, wondering again what it was that felt so odd. It was almost a feeling of relief. "What happened to that man?" Cal asked. "Graham. Didn't he come with us?" "Yeah," said Marcus. "He did. I think that's him." The gangly kid was pointing between two trees, and when Cal turned and looked, he slammed a hand to his mouth, gagging. Brick walked over to them, curious, peering into the shadows to see a lump of something small and red and wet, like a butcher's parcel. Only this one had what looked like half a face, a ridge of teeth pushed up into an empty eye socket. He turned away, clamping his eyes shut. "Oh, sorry, Graham." Cal swore. "What the hell happened to him?" "He wasn't one of us," said Rilke, whispering her words into the dirt. "He couldn't survive it, and he fell to pieces." Nobody spoke for a few moments. Then Cal said, "Well, don't tell Daisy. I don't think she'll handle it well." Brick wasn't worried about Daisy, not anymore. She seemed capable of handling anything. He, on the other hand, he thought one more twist, one more horror might be the last straw, might just rip out the very last of his sanity and leave his head an empty bowl. And yet he didn't feel scared, didn't feel much of anything right now, which was freaking him out. "I'll cover it up," said Marcus, rooting around until he found a loose branch, hefting it over the man's mangled corpse. He stood back, wiping his hands on his trousers. The man's face was out of sight, but Brick could still see it in his head, as clear as day. He figured he probably always would, right up until the end. There it was again, not a sensation, but an absence of one, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Something, a piece of him that had been there for as long as he could remember, was now gone. This time he actually lifted up his dirt-caked T-shirt, prodding his belly. "Hungry?" asked Howie, the new kid. Brick dropped his T-shirt and looked at him. The kid was 13 or 14, and even though he'd turned, his skin was still mottled with bruises and cuts. "God knows I could eat a plate of something right now," Howie went on. "Think there's something around here somewhere around here we can get some food?" "How can you be hungry?" Cal asked. "Man's got to eat," said Howie. The forest grew brighter as Daisy returned, her fire sucked back into her pores as she touched down. She shook her head, the engine of her eyes sputtering out. "We're on the top of a big slope," she said, pointing to her left. "There's a city over there with loads of hills and a pointy tower thing, and the sea, and a big orange bridge. I can't see any sign of the man in the storm." "Still say you've scared the bastard away," said Brick, shivering. "You tore his face off. He's not coming back after that, right?" Nobody answered, and he glanced up to see that they were all looking at him. Daisy's head was cocked, a soft smile on her lips. He frowned at her, ready for that stew of anger to bubble up from his gut, almost disappointed when it didn't. There was only that same lull in his stomach, that absence. That's what it was, he suddenly understood. The anger. It wasn't there anymore. He slapped a hand to his belly as if somebody had taken a kidney. His rage was so much a part of him that it was almost frightening not to feel it there. "What?" he said, everyone still looking at him. "What is it?" "You," said Cal. "Look." He didn't want to, but what choice did he have? He lifted his T-shirt once more, the skin there blue. It could have been dirt, except for its soft sheen, a subtle sparkle when it caught the light. He put his hand to it, feeling the cold there. He scrubbed his skin, shaking loose flakes of ice. "No," he said. waiting for the fear, for the anger, for anything, but his stomach was empty, his head was empty. That was even worse than the ice which crept slowly up over his ribs, which stretched down from his fingertips like an infection, turning his hands to stone. Because he didn't care about his body, not really. He'd never liked it. Too tall, his face too blunt. But his anger, that was who he was. That's what made him Brick. Take that away, and what was left? Just let it happen, said Daisy, taking a step towards him. I know it's scary, but they're here to help. They'll look after you. They'll keep you safe. Yeah, like they did with Schiller, he snapped, his lips too cold to shape the words properly. It felt as though he'd been out in a blizzard, his skin frozen, as rigid as plastic. He staggered, stumbling into a tree, trying to lift his hands to his face, to turn his head. The others were growing faint, the world turning grey. Why was it happening like this? Didn't you have to be injured first, like Schiller, like Howie? Things are speeding up, said Daisy, her voice in the very centre of his brain. Because there isn't much time. Don't be frightened, Brick. I'm here. He felt himself fall. No pain as he landed in the needled undergrowth of the forest. He couldn't even be sure if he was facing up or down. A bolt of panic thudded into his heart, the briefest flare of dull anger quickly swallowed up by the same overwhelming calm. Don't fight it, said Daisy. He fought it, trying to ignite his rage like a pilot in freefall trying to fire up a stalled engine. Another dull explosion, too soft, too short to fight the paralysis. He tried again, and this time he managed to wrench open his eyes. He struggled to his feet, stumbling towards the light, not caring where he was going, just wanting to move, to get away. He made it 3 paces before he noticed he wasn't in the forest anymore. He made it another 2 before noticing that he didn't even have feet to pace with. He hung inside a palace of ice, the walls constantly shifting and full of other people's lives. It was the same place he'd visited in his dreams when he'd fallen asleep in the church. He spun around, searching for a way out, finding himself face to face with Daisy. She was engulfed in fire, her body a shimmering web of light, her face something from a dream, not quite real, not quite able to hold its form. Her wings arced over her head, towering up like a fountain of flame, spitting molten sparks of blue and red and gold. She reached out to him with a hand that was not really a hand, cold against his cheek. Do you trust me, Brick? He didn't reply. He just stared at her, at the creature that had possessed her. Everything about it screamed power, pure, unpolluted, undiluted energy. If it wanted, it could tear this world to ribbons of dust and blood, and yet there was nothing in it that spoke of violence, of anger, of hatred. It's because they're good, Daisy said. No. They weren't good. There was nothing in them at all, the same way there was no emotion in a gun or a bomb, just a collection of moving parts that does whatever it's told. Schiller had proved that when he'd destroyed Hemingway, when he'd killed those cops. Maybe it wasn't so bad then, to be powerful, to have control. If his angel had been the first to hatch, if it had happened back in Hemingway, then he'd never have let Rilke down into the cellar, and Lisa would still be alive. The thought of Rilke made his stomach churn, even though he was pretty sure he didn't have a stomach here, wherever this place was. Something was starting to burn in him, as if a taper had been lit. This thing, this creature, not an angel, it's the wrong word, this thing is older than the Bible, older than religion, older than the stars, was trying to smother the fear and the anger. That was part of the deal, he realised. In exchange for fire, you had to trade in a little piece of you, the emotions that might lead you to use those powers for something else. Even now the flickering heat in his gut was drenched. Just let it happen, please, Daisy said. It needs your help. It needed him, and he needed it too. He relaxed, taking a deep breath of air that didn't really exist, trying to switch off the rage. For now, at least. This creature, it didn't know him. It didn't understand that he was made of anger. Nothing could extinguish it. He would just pretend to be calm. He would go along with it, but his fury would still be there. It would always be there. Even with a being like this inside him, he would be able to find it. And when he did, Rilke was going to pay. Okay, he said to Daisy, smiling at her with his non-existent lips. I'm ready. Okay, so probably best leave it there. So Brick's angel is about to hatch. That's so weird. I think there was 2 chapters cut from this. I wonder if they were cut from the from this edition, because there was one chapter that was set in the there was one chapter that was set in the International Space Station, and I always really like that one. Oh yeah! Oh my god! It is in this book. That's so weird. I wonder why it got cut from that one. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, maybe we'll start with these tomorrow. So we had. Yeah, we got 2 chapters. Cool. Maybe I'll read them tomorrow. That's so weird. I wonder why they got cut from that one. Yeah, I haven't got time to read them now. I've got to run. But I'll start with those 2 tomorrow. Then it'll be going back in time today. One is where Jade dies. I just gave that away. Sorry about that. Sorry, Jade. And the other is set from the International Space Station. I will read them. And yeah, I don't know what happened to them in the Kindle version. I thought this was the one that had all the chapters that didn't get cut. I don't know. So anyway, I'll leave it there today. Join me tomorrow as we go back in time a little bit and see Jade die, because we can't not watch. I mean, she deserves a bit of company when she dies, and then we'll carry on. I hope you enjoyed that. It was lovely being here and hanging out with you. I love hanging out with you, and yeah, I will see you hopefully tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Cheerio.